The big news in economics right now is the fact that data has come out showing that inequality in the United States is as bad now as it was right before the beginning of the Great Depression. And that because of this, a lot of people are freaking out now, and they're worried that this will be the signal of another Great Depression that could be coming on, and given our current situation, it would be a lot worse than the one in the past. However, I would like to correct some kind of mistaken ideas about this. People tend to see this kind of inequality as what it is that triggers a great crisis like that. I would like to show that, in fact, this inequality is not the problem itself that triggers a crisis, but in fact it is actually a symptom of the process that which causes the crisis. As we can see, they're not kidding. We're right at the mark where it was right before the beginning of the Great Depression. But is this inequality really the whole story as it pertains to this possibility of crisis? It's not. In fact, it's just a symptom of the actual process that does cause crisis. So I think it's important that we take a look at some information regarding how capitalism functions and how it becomes inherently crisis prone if we are to truly understand the role of inequality in this situation. In our modern evolution of the system of credit money or fictitious capital, it is an absolute necessity in order for us to learn how it works to understand its function. The industrial capitalist is tremendously reliant on it for entering into new rounds of production. Even very large corporations like Ford and GM borrow the cost of production ahead of the creation of value. The settling of the account is paid for out of the surplus value collected by the capitalist. From this, we can see something very significant. In production and investment, all credit is reliant on not just the production of, but realization of surplus value. Without it, credit cannot be paid back. If enough credit in a system is not paid back, that system goes into crisis. Essentially, credit allows a person or a company to make a purchase without using money. In doing so, a debt is created that must eventually be paid back via wages or profits. The principal fact that causes such overproduction crisis in capitalist society is the fact that credit money can and is created far beyond the supply of metallic and token money. In other words, Federal Reserve notes or gold. If credit money can only be paid back in metallic or token money, and there literally isn't enough of it to do so, then the debt that is credit money can never be paid back in full. These unpaid debts can cause crisis. The issuers of credit sooner or later discover that the people that they have given credit money to are having a greater and greater difficulty in returning it to them in token and metallic money. They know a crisis from an inability to pay back those loans is coming. This happens because the issuer will be unable to realize enough token and metallic money to pay for all the credit money they've created. From this, the issuer begins to panic and try to convert as much of the credit money into token and metallic money as fast as possible. This ends up destroying a quantity of the credit money created. Hence, we get crisis because it was not paid back. So where does this leave us with inequality? Well, it's not hard to figure out who it is that's holding all the wealth in this society. I mean, it's very clear that the 0.01%, or better known as the financial aristocracy, are the ones who've absorbed all the wealth in the country. Now, Marx laid out perfectly well that finance capital would attempt to take as much of the surplus value, the value created through physical commodity production, as much as possible. Now, the reason that they will always do this and come up with really creative and innovative ways to take that is because they need as much token and metallic money as possible to offset the amount of fictitious capital that they have created through loans, credit, etc. An interest-bearing loan is made for production to begin. The bank is promised its money back plus a certain percentage for profit, but that is not enough. It's never enough for finance. Even workers' wages as value must be absorbed as much as possible. Mortgage on a house is a good example. You spend your wages on the home via a mortgage loan that promises the bank its money back plus a certain percentage for profit. Finance capital's mode of exploiting labor go far beyond that of industrial capital employing it to sell its products at a profit, and even beyond simple usurious lending to labor, above all for housing. Most innovative has been the appropriation of labor savings via pension funds and mutual funds. In the 1950s, General Motors and other large companies offered to contribute to funds to pay pensions in exchange for slower growth in wages. This policy, which Peter Drucker patronizingly calls the pension fund socialism, turned over wage set aside to professional money managers, to buy stocks and junk bonds to make financial gains, but not in a manner.
If you look at a dollar bill from before 1933, it says it is redeemable in gold. You look at a dollar bill today, it says it is legal tender, which means it is backed by absolutely nothing. It is worthless paper. The only thing that gives our money value is how much of it is in circulation. Therefore, the power to regulate the money supply is also the power to regulate its value, which is also the power to bring entire economies.
Managers with funds to use against labor and against industrial capital itself. Pension fund managers played a large role in the junk bonding of industry in the 1980s, and finding themselves graded on their performance every 3 months. Fund managers back raiders who seek to gain by downsizing and outsourcing labor. They typically find their fortune and even job survival to lie in using pension savings not in ways that increase employment, improve working conditions, or invest in productive capital formation, but in making gains purely by financial means, corporate looting that strips assets to pay dividends and increase short-term stock prices, or simply pay off creditors. Meanwhile, the largest sellers of stocks have been managers and venture capitalists cashing out by selling into a market fueled mainly by labor's wage set-asides. Pension funds thus turn out a key role in enabling finance capitalists to realize their gains, only to their fate to be left holding an empty bag in the end. Selling off stocks to pay retirees creates an outflow of funds from the stock market that reverses the initial price run-up. Now that brings us right back to where we started, where inequality comes from. In our modern capitalist society, the large driver of inequality in the system is the amount of surplus value created in commodity production that is soaked up by the financial aristocracy or finance capital to cover all of the fictitious value that they have created through producing loans. In other words, without really having done anything, and get that just for the simple fact that they've created a loan upon bookkeeping entry. And the constant struggle it is to keep up with that creation of fictitious value in order to stave off any kind of recession that could happen because of it. So what does this really have to do with the whole subject, the larger subject that we're supposed to be discussing? We see when the media focuses merely on the act of the inequality, they're only really targeting a symptom of the larger problem, which is the capitalist mode of production itself. The idea is, if we simply focus on the inequality, it becomes something that we can argue against. Oh, let's raise the minimum wage. If we just raise the minimum wage, then we can do something about this inequality. And then a lot of economists go out and they argue this. Well, we can boost sales so long as we do this, and the businesses claim that we can't stay in business if we do that. Now, even some Marxist economists like Richard Wolff, who I do respect a great deal, argue that by boosting the minimum wage of employees, or by boosting wages of employees, it does offset the increased cost because they will then go out and spend that. So as a class in whole, when workers have more wages, they spend those wages at those same places, so it balances out at the end. But the problem is, the thing that he's not taking into account here is the falling rate of profit. And that is a key ingredient, because when they are paying employees more, if they don't raise the price, they are getting a smaller rate of profit in return. And the falling rate of profit is tied to an overall trend that causes crisis. This is the current rate of profit experienced by companies in the United States. As we can see, there is a small trend towards a falling rate. But this data doesn't tell us everything that we need to know. The official figures for profit needed to be adjusted for other fictitious profits, namely those made by banks from lending to government, bond purchases, and from utilizing workers' savings, mortgages, etc. Government spending that is financed by borrowing is recorded as output in NIPA, but it is really fictitious income. This is the U.S. rate of profit based on non-fictitious profit, something that doesn't have to be paid back in order to be real, and it clearly shows a secular decline over the whole period and the same sharp fall after 1965. It also shows a stabilization and slight rise after 1982 before falling sharply after 1997. Thus, the U.S. rate of profit leading up to the Great Recession, the one in 2008, had taken a significant tumble, suggesting again its role in that slump. The actual rate of profit has been falling steadily. Thus, we can see in the capitalist system, sure, we could put through legislation that would increase workers' wages, and they would in turn go out and spend that in the economy and have a supposed recovery. But that's not the whole story. It's more than that. This would not stave off the crisis. Would this create more jobs? Yes, it would. But it wouldn't stop the impending crisis that comes from finance capital's endless hunger for the surplus value and workers' wages, which doesn't change. And if people have more money, well, finance capital is just going to find more ways in order to get it. They're going to come up with new betting schemes. They're going to start getting even further into people's retirement plans now that they have this money, and they can start offering private pension plans, stuff like that. Your RRSP in Canada, whatever. The whole thing about attacking the inequality as being the source of the problem is the problem here. The real problem is the capitalist mode of production itself and the inherent contradictions throughout. When we focus entirely on this idea of inequality, it makes it seem like it's something that we can legislate away. If we just get enough Democratic senators in there to change the laws and force a better minimum wage and whatnot, and even if it could be done nationally, that this would somehow take care of the problem. Well, we don't have to worry anymore because the inequality is ironed out. It's in a much better position. So therefore, we don't have to be afraid of some impending crisis. But that targets the wrong cause. Capitalism is a system itself, particularly finance capital, which has an unending hunger for workers' wages. This presents us with the false idea, a liberal idea, that we can just legislate away the problem. But that's not going to happen. As we can see, this doesn't challenge the inherent nature of capitalism and its crisis-prone structure itself. We cannot be distracted by these side issues that we can just, hopefully can go away just by taking, proper government action. It's not going to work. And this is, in fact, a distraction from the real problem, which is capitalism itself. And that's what I feel the mainstream media is not telling people, because it's not really set up to criticize capitalism. It can only criticize particular phenomena within capitalism or particular capitalists. For example, they love to attack the Koch brothers, and rightfully so. The Koch brothers are evil. But their evil is nothing more than a manifestation of the system that they themselves defend. And in order to really get to the root of all these problems, we have to truly understand the entire context of the situation in which they exist. We do not need to merely understand inequality to avoid this impending disaster. We need to understand capitalism itself and all the contradictions and mechanisms throughout in order to avoid that. And even then, it eventually can't be done. You're asking capitalism to function without credit, and it's not going to happen. Or you're asking, at the very least, credit to not cause overproduction, which is not possible. By the very nature of credit, fictitious value, it's created ahead of the actual realization of value through production and then sale. we can't focus merely on inequality. We have to focus on the problem itself, and that problem is the capitalist system.